I was driving alone at night, until I realized I wasn't. It was supposed to be just another late-night drive. Empty roads, music playing low, and the hum of the engine keeping me company. It was past midnight, and the highway stretched endlessly ahead. I had been driving for hours without seeing another car, until I noticed a strange set of headlights in my rearview mirror. They never got closer, and they never faded away. I slowed down. They slowed down. I sped up. They sped up. I took the next exit to a small rural road, hoping to lose them. When I glanced in the mirror, the headlights were gone. Relief lasted only seconds. In the passenger seat, which had been empty all night, a pale face was staring at me in the dark. I swerved the car, and when I looked again, the seat was empty. The passenger I never picked up. It was a cold, rainy night, and the road home felt longer than ever. I was driving to back roads when I saw a figure standing by the roadside, drenched, one arm raised as if trying to flag me down. I slowed, but before I even stopped completely, they vanished. A few minutes later, the smell of wet clothes and earth filled the car. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there, in the back seat, sat the same figure, head tilted, staring at me. I slammed the brakes and turned around, but the seat was empty. Every time it rains at night, I feel a weight in the back seat, the lights that wouldn't pass. It was a lonely desert highway. Just me, the black sky, and the phantom of tires against asphalt. In my mirror, I noticed two faint lights far behind me. They stayed the exact same distance away, no matter my speed. I turned onto a side road with no lights. The headlights followed. Then they began to rise higher and higher until they floated above the road like glowing eyes. The road that didn't exist. It was past 2 a.m. I had driven this route dozens of times, but that night there was a turn I didn't recognize. I took it. The asphalt was cracked and abandoned. My GPS froze. There were no houses, no signs, just darkness. Then I saw them, dozens of silhouettes standing along the road, perfectly still, all facing my car. I sped up until I reached the main road. My GPS came back, but it showed something impossible. That road didn't exist. The hitchhiker in the red dress. It was a summer night when I saw her, a woman in a bright red dress, standing under a broken streetlight, thumb out. I slowed, but before I could stop, she was sitting in my passenger seat. She didn't speak, just stared ahead with her hands folded. After a few miles, she whispered, "This is where I died." I blinked, and she was gone. The man in the rearview mirror. It was close to midnight on a quiet suburban road. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there he was, a man sitting in my back seat, head lowered, so I couldn't see his face. I pulled over and looked, but the seat was empty. As I drove off, I looked again. This time, he was smiling. The gas station that shouldn't be there. Almost 3 a.m., my gas light came on. I found a small, old gas station. The attendant filled my tank without speaking. When I looked in the mirror after leaving, the station was gone. A local later told me it had burned down 20 years ago. The woman by the tunnel. The highway cut through a mountain pass with a single tunnel. A woman stood at the entrance, head tilted, hair covering her face. I slowed, and as my light swept over her, I saw she wasn't standing on the ground. She was hanging above it, the road that loops. Driving home late, I passed the same billboard 3 times in 10 minutes. On the 5th loop, a man in a suit stood by the sign. By the 7th, he was in the middle of the road, smiling. The silent convoy. A foggy night on the interstate. 3 identical black cars ahead, no plates, no visible drivers. They slowed when I slowed, sped up when I sped up. When I exited, they were gone. Then, on the ramp, they were behind me again, headlights off. The child on the bridge, crossing an old bridge at midnight. I saw a boy staring at the water. When I stepped out of the car, he was gone. The water was still rippling. The face in the glass. Rain covered my windshield. I rolled the window down and saw a reflection in the glass. Pale skin, wide eyes. I turned to the passenger seat. Empty. When I looked back at the glass, the face was smiling. The truck that wouldn't pass. A semi appeared behind me, headlights blinding. I changed lanes to let it pass, but it didn't. Finally, it roared by with no driver in the cab. The vanishing exit. My gas was low when I saw a sign for exit 13. I took the ramp, but it wound through trees and ended in fog. When I turned around, the ramp was gone. The man walking backwards. On a country road, a man walked along the shoulder, backwards. I passed him, but in my mirror, he was still there, matching my speed. The roadside piano. At 4 a.m., my headlights revealed a grand piano on the roadside. As I passed, I heard it playing. When I looked back, it was in the middle of the road. The girl in the middle lane. On an empty highway, a girl in a white dress stood in the middle lane. I swerved to avoid her. In the mirror, she was in my back seat. The fog that followed. It was a calm night, and I was driving along a deserted road. Suddenly, a thick fog rolled in, almost unnatural in its density. I slowed down, but no matter how fast I drove, the fog stayed close behind me, swallowing the headlights of every car that might have been behind. Minutes felt like hours. When I finally reached the edge of the fog, the road behind me was empty. As I looked back, the fog lingered, shaping faint silhouettes of figures I could never clearly see. The man who knew my name. I was on a country road, passing fields under a full moon. Out of nowhere, a man appeared on the side of the road. He didn't wave or ask for help. He just stood there, silently. I slowed and he said my name. Every hair on my body stood on end. I rolled up the window and drove faster. When I looked back, he was gone. I had never seen him before in my life. The cabin at the end of the road. I took a detour to explore a forest road I had never driven before. At the end, I found an old cabin, its windows dark and covered in grime. Something compelled me to stop. As I got closer, I saw someone inside, a figure standing perfectly still, watching me. I stepped back, but the door opened slowly, creaking on its hinges. I ran back to my car and drove off. When I glanced back, the cabin had vanished. The lights on the hill. Driving late at night, I noticed small, flickering lights on a hill beside the road. Curious, I slowed down. The closer I got, the more I realized they weren't lanterns or fires. They moved like eyes watching me, shifting from one spot to another. I sped up, and when I looked back, the lights weren't just on the hill anymore. They were on the road behind me, keeping pace. The sound of footsteps behind me. I was driving down an empty road when I thought I heard footsteps on the shoulder. I glanced in the mirror. Nothing. Then I heard them again, closer this time. Heart racing. I checked every window. No one was there. But every few minutes, the sound returned, matching the rhythm of my own heartbeat. The stranger in the rear view, I was pulling out a small town, road stretching straight into the dark countryside. A figure appeared in my rear view mirror, walking alongside my car, perfectly matching my speed. I pressed the gas, but he kept pace. Minutes later, he disappeared, but the impression of him, the feeling that he was still there, lingered for miles. The road that led nowhere. I followed a GPS route through a forested area. The road was narrow and overgrown, twisting unnaturally. After 20 minutes, I realized the GPS was still showing me moving, but I was driving in circles. Every landmark I passed looked identical to the last. When I finally turned around, the forest seemed denser, unfamiliar. It was as if the road had trapped me in its own loop. The woman in the fields. I was driving along a rural road when I saw a woman standing in the middle of a field. She wore a pale dress that almost glowed in the moonlight. I slowed, thinking she might need help, but she didn't move. As I passed, she raised her arm, pointing toward the road ahead. That stretch of road, when I reached it, was blocked by a landslide that hadn't been reported anywhere. The car that followed me home. Late at night, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but every turn I made, it followed. Streets, highways, even back roads. It was always there. When I finally reached my driveway and turned off the engine, the car stopped at the end of the street, engine idling. I never saw it again, but every time I drive that route at night, I feel eyes on me. The shadow at the tunnel entrance. Driving through a tunnel, I saw a shadow at the entrance, tall, thin, and perfectly still. My headlights revealed nothing as I got closer. Halfway through, I realized the shadow had moved inside the tunnel, stretching unnaturally, following me. When I exited, the entrance was empty, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me for days. The road that whispered. Late at night, I was driving along a winding country road when I started hearing whispers from the trees. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the words grew clearer. My name, repeated over and over. I glanced around, but there was no one there. The whisper stopped the moment I turned onto the next road, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me for miles. The figure in the fog. Fog had rolled in thick that night, reducing visibility to almost nothing. I drove cautiously, but suddenly I saw a figure walking along the shoulder, tall, still, and shrouded in mist. As I passed, the figure didn't move. I looked back in a mirror. It was following me, appearing closer with each blink, until it vanished just outside my sight. The car with no driver. I was driving down a lonely stretch of highway when a car appeared behind me. Its headlights were on, but no driver was visible. Every time I sped up, it matched my speed. When I finally stopped at a gas station, the car rolled past without a driver inside, tires humming softly, as if it were alive. The road that disappeared. A detour led me down a narrow forest path. Minutes in, the trees seemed to close around me, and the road ahead became barely visible. I turned around, but the entrance I had taken was gone. The GPS showed the road continuing straight to the forest, but in reality, it ended in a wall of tangled branches. The girl in the middle of the highway. Driving alone at night, I saw a girl standing in the center of a wide highway. She didn't move as I approached, forcing me to swerve. When I looked back in my mirror, she was sitting in my back seat, silently staring. The empty gas station. It was almost 2 a.m. when I pulled into a small gas station to fill up. The pumps worked, but the building was dark and empty. I looked around, and no one was there, not a single employee, customer, or sound. I drove away quickly, and when I glanced back, the station had vanished entirely, leaving only trees where it had stood. The man standing in the road. On a quiet country road, a man stood perfectly still, facing away from me. I slowed and honked, but he didn't move. As I passed, I noticed he had no shadow. When I looked back in the mirror, he was gone, but later at home, I saw the same man reflected in my window, the lights that moved on their own. Driving through a remote area, I saw small lights in the distance. They flickered and moved like fireflies at first, but then they began to follow my car, keeping pace even as I accelerated. I turned onto a side road to escape them, but the lights appeared there too, floating silently behind me until I lost them miles later. The bridge that wasn't there. I was driving late when I came across a bridge I didn't recognize. It looked old but sturdy. I drove across, and the fog swallowed me halfway over. When I emerged, the landscape had changed completely, and the GPS showed I was on a road that didn't exist. The woman by the side of the road. I passed a woman standing alone by the roadside, holding a lantern. Her face was pale, and her eyes were hollow. As I got closer, she slowly raised her hand and pointed directly at me. By the time I passed, she had vanished, but when I looked back, her silhouette was walking alongside my car for a few moments, then disappeared into the darkness. The shadow in the back seat. I was driving late on a rural road when I noticed a shadow in the back seat. At first, I thought it was my own imagination, but every glance in the mirror confirmed it. It never moved, never spoke. It just stared silently. When I parked at my house, the shadow was gone, but the feeling of being watched never left me. The car in the mirror. I was driving along an empty highway when I saw a car in my rearview mirror. Its lights glowed brightly, but there was no driver. No matter how many turns I took, it stayed behind me, keeping pace perfectly. When I finally pulled into a well-lit area, the car disappeared, as if it had never been there. The vanishing street. I took a shortcut through a small neighborhood I didn't know. The street twisted and narrowed, and soon the houses disappeared. When I tried to turn back, the road had vanished, replaced by dense trees and darkness. GPS showed the street continuing, but I could see nothing ahead. The boy in white. I was driving past a park at midnight when I saw a boy in a white shirt standing under a streetlight. He didn't move, didn't blink. When I glanced again, he was walking toward my car, impossibly fast, and then vanished before I could stop. The man who walked backwards. A man appeared on a country road, walking perfectly backward. I slowed down, think it was a prank, but he kept pace with my car. When I turned a corner, he was gone. Later, I realized I had passed that exact same stretch of road twice. The Foggy intersection. I reached a four-way intersection enveloped in thick fog. As I slowed, I noticed figures standing at each corner, barely visible. None moved, none spoke. I hurried through, but when I glanced back, the intersection looked completely empty, as if it had never been there. The passenger who disappeared. Driving home, I thought I saw someone sitting in my passenger seat. I glanced at them, and they were pale, silent, and staring straight ahead. When I looked back again, the seat was empty. I never saw them again, but every time I drive alone at night, I check the passenger seat twice. The road that looped. Late one night, I took a country road I thought would be a shortcut. After 10 minutes, I realized I had passed the same old barn 3 times. I tried turning around, but the road kept looping, always leading me back to the same spot. It wasn't until dawn that I finally found a real highway again. The woman in red. I saw a woman in a red dress, standing by the roadside, motionless. When I slowed down, she disappeared. A few miles later, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her sitting silently in my back seat, looking. Straight at me, the truck with empty eyes. A semi-truck appeared behind me on a deserted highway. Its headlights were bright, but the cab was empty, no driver, no silhouette, nothing. It followed me for miles, keeping pace perfectly until I finally exited the highway. Then it vanished. The silent hitchhiker. I saw a young woman on the side of a deserted road. She held out her thumb, asking for a ride. I stopped, and she climbed in silently. We drove for a few miles, and when I looked at her, she had vanished. The door never opened, and there was no one in the seat. The house that moved. Driving late, I passed a small, abandoned house I'd never noticed before. When I glanced back a minute later, the house had shifted slightly closer to the road. I sped up, but every time I looked back, it was a little closer than before. The road that screamed. I was driving through a forested area when I heard a scream echo across the trees. I slowed down, but the scream followed my car, growing louder as I moved forward. When I stopped, there was silence, and yet the sound lingered in my mind for hours. The eyes in the woods. On a lonely night drive, I saw faint lights in the trees. As I focused, I realized they were eyes, reflecting my headlights. They disappeared when I blinked, only to reappear further down the road, watching silently. The bridge that was too long. I drove onto an old bridge at midnight. It seemed longer than usual, stretching endlessly into darkness. The water below reflected nothing, no moon, no stars. By the time I reached the other side, the sun was rising and the bridge appeared normal again. The woman who followed my headlights. Driving through a rural area, I noticed a woman walking along the side of the road. As my headlights approached, she didn't move, but when I passed, she was suddenly a few feet ahead, matching my speed. I accelerated, but she stayed ahead of me until I turned onto a main road. The man on the overpass. I was driving under an overpass when I saw a man standing on the edge, staring down. He wore dark clothes and didn't move. A chill ran down my spine. When I glanced back after passing, he was gone, and the overpass looked completely empty. The road that shouldn't exist. My GPS led me down a narrow path I had never seen before. It twisted and turned through dense forest. After a few miles, I realized I had been driving in circles. The GPS insisted I was moving forward, but the landscape repeated endlessly. The child who whispered. A child's voice called my name as I drove along an empty road. I slowed, looking around, but saw nothing. The whisper followed me, repeating my name softly, until I turned off onto a highway and the voice vanished. The car that mirrored me. I noticed a car behind me on a dark road. Every turn I made, it mirrored perfectly. If I sped up, it sped up. If I slowed, it slowed. When I finally stopped, the car stopped too, but there was no driver and the mirrors reflected nothing. The stranger in the rear view. I was driving down a dark country road when I saw a figure sitting in my rear view mirror. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, but the figure stayed there, motionless, staring at me. Every turn I took, it remained in the mirror until it vanished as suddenly as it appeared. The road that led into darkness. I followed a narrow road through the woods, expecting it to loop back to the highway. Instead, the trees closed in around me, and the road seemed endless. No signs, no lights, nothing familiar. I finally turned back, but the highway entrance had disappeared. The woman who appeared in every reflection. Driving alone, I glanced at the side mirror and saw a woman stand behind me. I looked forward, and she wasn't there. When I looked at the mirror again, she was closer. By the time I reached home, she appeared in every reflective surface. Mirrors, windows, even my phone screen. The car that wasn't there. I thought I saw headlights behind me on a deserted road. I slowed to let the car pass, but no vehicle was there. When I accelerated, I saw the same headlights again, perfectly keeping pace, until they vanished without a trace. The tunnel that whispered. I drove through an old tunnel late at night. Halfway through, I heard whispers, faint at first, then louder, repeating my name. I sped up, and the whispers turned into screams, fading only as I exited the tunnel. The man in the middle of the road. A man stood in the center of a country road, completely still. I honked, but he didn't move. As I passed, I noticed he had no shadow. Glancing back, he was gone, but the air still felt heavy, as if he were watching. The road with no end. I took a detour through a forest path. The road twisted endlessly, and every landmark looked the same. Hours passed, but GPS insisted I was moving forward. I finally found the highway, but the forest still felt like it had trapped me in a loop. The girl who walked alongside my car. Driving late, I noticed a girl walking beside the road. She never spoke, never looked at me, just kept pace with my car. When I turned onto a main road, she vanished instantly, leaving no trace behind. The lights that followed me home. On a remote road, I saw small lights flickering behind me. At first, I thought they were distant cars, but no road existed there. They matched my every turn, keeping pace, until I reached my driveway. Then they disappeared, as if they had been waiting for me, the man who knew my secrets. While driving late, a man appeared by the roadside. He didn't speak at first, but then he recited details about my life that no one could know. Terrified, I sped off. When I looked back, he was gone, but the knowledge he had shared lingered in my mind, haunting me.